one.
Okay, Chair, we're ready.
All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order.
All right, Ms. Townley.
Here.
Mr. Chair Kinton.
Here.
Mr. Patinos.
Here.
Mr. Britt.
Here.
Mr. Kremeyer.
Here.
Mr. Madrid.
Here.
Mr. Fish.
Here.
Ms. Austin.
Here.
And Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and approve the minutes from the last meeting. We have no minutes? Okay. All right, well, so we go ahead and make a motion to open the public hearing. Case ZON 2017-002 at 3333 South Pearl Street. Plan unit development for 7 units. Thank you.
So moved.
I'm sorry, who moved and seconded?
I moved.
Second.
Okay, staff.
Good evening. Before you tonight is zoning case. Oh, sorry. Not used to this if we're not standing.
Do you swear you will tell the truth in this proceeding for the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do. Audra Kirk with Community Development. Okay. Good evening again. Before you tonight is zoning case ZON 2017-002. This is a public. Okay, I'm sorry. Is this better? Okay. This is a public hearing for planned unit development located at 3317 to 3333 South Pearl Street. The proof of posting and proof of publishing have been submitted for the record. Also submitted for the record were 3 emails from residents that came in later this week that were not included in the packet, and those were those 3 emails that I handed to you as you came in the room tonight. The applicant is requesting to rezone 3 properties from an R1C zone district, which is a single family on a small lot, to a planned unit development. The proposed planned unit development would allow for a maximum of 1 single family attached one single family attached dwelling with 3 units and 2 single family attached dwellings with 2 units. The properties surrounding the subject properties on the north, south, and west are all single family in the R1C zone district. And directly to the west of this proposed planned unit development is the MUR3C zone district, which is high density residential and limited office. A neighborhood meeting was held on June 6, 2017, and approximately 20 people attended that meeting. Included in your packet tonight were minutes from that neighborhood meeting that was held on June 6th. The applicant has provided a detailed PowerPoint presentation tonight on the proposed PUD. So in order to not be redundant on the entire presentation, I'm going to let him go ahead and give the details of the PUD. After his presentation, and right now I'm available for questions now and again, of course, after his presentation. So are there questions for me now?
Audra, I'd like to bring John Voboril up if I can.
John, you're going to have to use the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to bring John Voboril up if I can, have him sworn in. I think this would be a good time to do it before the presentation.
Okay.
I do.
State your name.
John Voboril, Planner 2, Inglewood Community Development Department.
John, in the packet on the conformance to the comprehensive plan, it says explore residential redevelopment plans that promote infill townhome development between the hospital and single-family neighborhoods to the north to provide transitional zone that will diversify land use mix, provide opportunities for new housing and home ownership. And the first word in there is explore. And I've got three quick questions for you. First question, when we're looking at Explore, what was the outcome of our discussions for this during the medical small area plan sessions?
For the medical small area plan rezoning sessions, the area that was looked at was specifically the area that is now currently zoned as MUR3C between Pearl Street and then the alley between Clarkson and Emerson Street. The single-family R1C areas that abut that area were not looked at and were never on the table. However, we did get good participation from the citizens who lived in those areas. They seemed to want to keep their neighborhood stable, and they had some concerns about what might happen in that MUR3C area between Pearl and the alley between Clarkson and Emerson. They did feel that there should be some opportunities for some redevelopment to occur in that area, but their chief concern was to make sure that the height of any redevelopment in that area be consistent with what is there today. And so one of the things that was changed was to lower the height from 60 feet to down to 40 feet.
And the second question, thanks, John. What was the motivation for the consultants to add this exploration of this area to the comp plan?
So the transition zones are typically areas that are adjacent to a very intensive development commercial area, such as the hospitals themselves. They're very, very intensive, high-density commercial area. Over time, typically the consultant believed that there would probably be some type of pressure for some type of change close by, approximately located close to that intensive hospital area use. In the past, I was looking back at the zoning records that we have in our office today, and in 1955, between 1955 and 1963, some apartment buildings were built there along Girard Avenue, and a citizen came forward and believing that that would be a better use of that area and asked for a rezoning of that area between Pearl and the alley between Clarkson and Emerson. And that's what instigated that rezoning a long time ago. And what we're seeing today, the consultant actually proved pretty seeing in the fact that today we have seen the pressure. There is somebody who's come forward who has a number of properties that are typically probably substandard in terms of housing, and they would like to do something different with those. Probably a lot has to do with because of its location close to that hospital.
Okay, and again, we're talking about the exploration of residential development, townhomes, and adding multifamily. When will we do this exploration? These plans for this and the plans for this residential transition area, are we going to do this tonight before we make our decision? Are we going to do you think it's wise for us to do this exploration, or is this something maybe we look at in December as a possible priority for discussion next year, or what do you think, John?
As with most topics of the Planning and Zoning Commission, this is not something that could be decided or figured out in one session, and it's definitely not going to happen tonight. We did earlier this year have work with the Planning and Zoning Commission to go over our comp plan strategies and to figure out what would our top priorities be in the next 3 years. There was some discussion that was talked about the medical district and what might be done there. But however, quite frankly, the city probably has a lot bigger issues that we would like to explore than some of these transitional areas at this time. So it was not recommended that we work on this in the next 3 years in these areas around the hospital. We're pretty happy with the zoning changes that have been made in the last 7 or 8 years. And things are happening there, and we're pretty happy about that. And I believe that the owner of this property, due to that reason why he was not seeing us going forward with that, decided to develop this PUD concept instead.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you answering the questions.
Thank you.
I have a question. I guess it's more of a procedural question, so for either of you. So in UDC 1628, under our plan unit development, zoning, reprocess, or process requirements, there's the two requirements or the criteria for the decision-making body to look at. And I just wanted a little clarification. So I'm looking at F, approval criteria, and it's mentioned also on page 6 of our packet. Says approval criteria, PUD rezoning shall be made in the interest of promoting health, safety, and general welfare of the community, shall be consistent with the comp plan. In addition, the review or decision-making body shall only recommend approval of or shall only approve a proposed PUD rezoning if it finds the proposed rezoning meets the criteria listed below. And then there's a 1, a 1A, a 1B, a 2, and an A. Under 1, I won't read the whole thing if that's okay. It says that you need to meet at least one of the following criteria. A is the proposed development will exceed the development quality standards, level of public amenities, or level of design innovation otherwise applicable under this title. And the proposed development would not be allowed or practicable under a standard zone with conditional uses or with a reasonable number of zoning variances or administrative adjustments. Or B is the property cannot be developed or no reasonable economic use of the property can be achieved under the existing zoning. So in A, for the criteria, where it says there's several things listed within that criteria, we only have to meet one, or we have to meet all of A or all of B. Is that long enough?
I guess so the rest of the commission can follow along on this. Exactly where are we in the code, or is it all contained in the packet?
Sure. Well, no, it's mentioned in the packet.
So where is it in the code?
In the code, it's 16-2-8, CD 1628.
16-2-8.
4A and 4B in the packet.
16-2-8. Okay.
Yes, part F.
The way that I interpret that is that they only need to meet one of the criteria.
But do you interpret the criteria as either A or B? Or
Yes.
anything written within A or anything written within B? Right now, we're at anything written within A.
Right now, we're at what? I'm sorry?
Right now, my interpretation is that we're meeting something within A, but not all of A. Unless I'm...
Well, my interpretation would be that you would need to meet A or B.
Okay.
That you would need to meet definitely all of either A or B. And that's my interpretation.
Are there any other questions?
Yes. Yes, I have a question for the staff. Back to the packet material on page 4, where we show a comparison of the existing R1C zone to the new zoning. Can you tell me, for the new zoning, how it is different from an R2A or R2B? It looks very similar to an R2A or an R2B to me.
It is very similar. It is very similar to both R2A and R2B.
Can you give us any more specifics on how it, I mean, to me, I'm trying to find if there is any difference at all.
I think if you can give me just a second.
And perhaps rather than to have this delay too long, because it's kind of a technical question, maybe I can ask the question a different way. Would the proposed project be allowed in an R2A or an R2B without any zoning change?
Yes, it would.
Okay. That's mostly what I want to know. So if this were instead of an R1C zone, it were an R2A or an R2B, there would be no need for any PUD. It would simply be allowed in that zone as proposed, since most of the landscaping and other setbacks and stuff appear to all be within an R2A or B.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. That's it for me.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Okay. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to the applicant.
Why don't you just grab one of these?
How's that?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'll talk quieter.
Nancy, are you going to swear him in?
Yep. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and address.
My name is Casey Adranya, and I'm the owner of 3333 South Pearl Street. Just a brief introduction of who we are. Again, I am the owner. My wife and I own 3333 South Pearl. And also here tonight are Scott and Michelle Brand, who own 3323 South Pearl, as well as Kelly Rhodes, who owns 3317 South Pearl. So the three of us are basically joined together to basically propose this PUD. So first off, we've kind of jumped into this a little bit, but to me, probably the most critical and important aspect of what we're proposing is our location and existing context. So just to give you all an idea of where we are, which I'm sure is pretty easy, we're on Pearl Street here with Floyd Avenue to the north and Girard to the south, and of course Swedish and Craig Hospital directly to the south as well. Then just looking at the current zoning, which this has been touched on as well briefly tonight. As you can see, we are R1C currently, but you can also see that we are directly adjacent to MUR 3C, which is high-density residential. And again, this I feel is the most important part of what we're proposing. I feel like if we were proposing this, drop in the middle of R1C, I mean, I don't think we would have much of a case or an argument for why we want to do that. And we're in somewhat of a unique scenario in this case, being that the zone transition line happened on the street itself. If you look at most of the scenarios, which it makes sense, you want to have a zone transition that falls on the alley. What this does is it gives a uniform street frontage with similar zone districts on both sides of the street. So in our case, we have somewhat of a mismatch of a street context, which creates, it's more of an eclectic street. And we'll show that a little bit more here. This is kind of a good depiction of our context. So this top image is kind of a bird's eye view looking east to the east side of Pearl Street, which is again MUR 3C, high density residential. So you can see it's a very diverse land mix directly across the street from us. You have an apartment here on the corner, single family townhomes, single family, high density apartment, several other single family homes and apartments on the corner, which I believe these two houses just went under contract, so I would imagine there would be a development there. Then just kind of looking at the context of the west side of Pearl Street, you have several smaller single-family homes. There are a few two-story homes, single-family, and then here's the big lot, that I am the owner of. There's a very small alley home that sits at the back. So this is the back side. Here's our alley. The garage and the house sit at the very back of the property. And then here are the other two homes that are a part of our PUD. So that just kind of shows, that depiction, it clearly defines, the change in zone districts and the eclectic nature of our street frontage right now. Then going on to the comprehensive plan, which was already discussed tonight. This is probably the most specific portion of the comprehensive plan that is specific to our property. So this is our property right there. So you can see this darker yellow, that is the MUR 3C zone district. And this a little bit lighter shade in between here and on the east side of that zone district are the areas that were labeled residential transition area, which we have already heard the explanation to explore residential redevelopment plans that promote infill townhome developments between the hospitals to the south and single family to the north. And again, I think this just kind of reaffirms our context, what we're seeing with that street, kind of the different context between both sides of Pearl Street in that location. It's been identified in the comprehensive plan as well. And kind of going to the comprehensive plan, as John has brought up, I did explore, what does this mean that we are in residential transition? I briefly spoke at another planning commission, what does this mean? And the response I received was, well, something could happen or nothing could happen. We really didn't know. And that is what kind of pushed us to pursue the PUD, rather than, simply waiting for the direction from Inglewood. So kind of going to the zone district standards that we'd be proposing, and pretty much right in line with R2B. As you can see, the comparison, this is existing R1C. So for a single family home, we are decreasing the minimum lot size to 4,500 square feet and minimum lot size for multi-unit or townhomes to be 3,000 square feet. And then moving to maximum lot coverage, this is an area I wanted to keep that as low as possible. When I was laying out the sites, with the addition of the garages, it was very difficult to keep it at 40%. So we are proposing a 50% maximum lot coverage. So that is an area that would be different than R2B. R2B is currently, you're allowed 60% lot coverage, but I wanted to keep the pressure down on the lot coverage. Similar to R2B, 25 feet frontage. And then everything else here, maximum height, and all of the setbacks will remain the same. And so will the bulk plane. So we're not proposing to increase the bulk plane or the maximum height at all. We're proposing that all of that stays exactly the same. So, based on that, given each lot, 3333 is an extra big lot. So the potential for that would be one option would be to subdivide it into 2 lots, 2 4,700 square foot lots, and build single family homes. And the other is to do 3 townhomes. Whereas on the other 2 lots, they're 50-foot wide lots. They would be able to do duplexes or, as they are currently, build a single-family home. And that's the same for both of those lots. So here's just kind of an image of very basic comparison of what it is today and what it could potentially be as maximum build-out. So one thing that I think that this does for our neighborhood is it kind of connects the street frontage. Right now our house sits at the very back of the lot, so as you're walking along there, it's definitely kind of a missing tooth within the street frontage. And just kind of going to the target market, with our proximity to Swedish, I think that Swedish medical professionals would definitely look for new housing directly north of the hospital, as I know for a fact that for Swedish and Craig employees, housing is very difficult close to the hospital. So this would give them more options closer to the hospital. Right now, the majority of Swedish and Craig employees live outside of Inglewood. And just general price range of what these townhomes would hit the market would be probably between $550 and $750. So throughout this process, it's very important to me to understand what the adjacent neighbors' concerns would be. So I've walked these streets several times just to kind of gain input on several concerns for if these were to be developed. And probably one of the biggest concerns is parking. With Swedish being there, parking is a constant issue, even though it's permit only on Pearl Street. So it was parking. So each one of the townhomes would have a 2-car garage associated with them, which I'll go into a little bit further. And then with the added traffic on the alley was the condition of the alley itself being dirt. I'm sure everyone who lives in Inglewood understands the issues that are going on with the alleys. They become eroded very quickly. So I am in conversations with Public Works to participate in the public-private partnership to basically pave the entire alley. In that case, Inglewood would come up with half of the cost, and if our PUD were to be approved, as the developers, we would cover the other half of the funds needed to pave the alley. So we're in the process of just identifying that a little bit more with Public Works right now. I'll be submitting a letter to them a little bit later this week, just to make sure that the funds are there with Inglewood to pursue that avenue. And then another major issue that I've come across, and this is somewhat separate from what we're proposing, but this is a very hazardous condition, and we're probably not the only ones. As you're coming out onto Floyd from our alley, cars can park right up against it, and I would imagine these are hospital employees. So when you're pulling out here, you have absolutely zero visibility either way. So pulling out is, I mean, there has to be a lot of accidents, and there's probably going to be a lot more in the future if no parking signs aren't at least a certain distance back from the intersection. So this is just something through my walking has been a major concern for our neighborhood. I've talked with a few city council members about getting signs, no parking signs in that location. So here's just a more detailed site plan of what we're proposing. So this lower one is the 3 townhomes. That's on the bigger lot. And then duplexes on the other 2 lots to the north. A part of laying this out, a very important part of it, was the undulation in the building facade to kind of break up the mass of the townhomes themselves. And so as the minimum front setback is 25, they also sit back a little bit more than the existing houses on both sides. They stick out a little bit more, so our houses will be set back a little bit more than the adjacent homes. And then here's just a landscape plan, which another, I think, critical part of breaking up the mass from the street context would be the landscape to kind of buffer the pedestrian zone to the townhomes. Now just trying to get into, just the architectural character that we'd be looking for. Definitely high quality design, high quality materials. We don't want all of the townhomes to look the same, but we want them to be somewhat uniform. We definitely want to engage the pedestrian portion of the sidewalks here with front porches to, one, minimize and kind of break up the scale and mass of the townhomes, but also to engage with the street context. And then these next slides are just more detailed renderings of the architectural character that we envision for these potential townhomes. Just trying to show a variety of different architectural characters that we see being present with this development. And with that pretty much concludes my presentation. I would like to have our other property owners just briefly speak, kind of coming from their perspective and where they're at with their property. All right, well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Please state your name and address.
My name is Scott Brand, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my wife. We live at 33, well, we don't live there. We own 3323 South Pearl.
Sorry, but I will need your actual physical address.
It's 8474 South Brentwood Street, Littleton. We currently rent the property that we're talking about, and our plan for our future is that we'd like to redevelop it so that we can actually be snowbirds in the future. We'd like to have a place that we could that's lower maintenance, and we'd like to build and sell one of the units and own the other unit, and then be able to travel. And so that's kind of our plan with the property. My wife and I just have enough that we could probably do something through a hard money loan and get it started. But we're really in the transition of finding out whether or not we can do it first. And so that's kind of where we're at. Any questions? Okay.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and address.
My name is Kelly Rhodes, and I own the property at 3317 South Pearl. And I have actually lived here all my life. It's been in my family since the early 60s, and I really don't plan on leaving. So I wanted the opportunity to be able to upgrade my house, and I was just trying to find out the best way to do that. And I actually only plan on it being in my family for the rest of, well, of course, the rest of my life, but to be passed on to my kids. So that's really all I have.
Chair? Okay, go ahead.
I was just curious.
Wait.
Oh, that one. The survey that you conducted for the neighbors on the block, which that was great information to have, so thank you for doing that. Yeah. Did you consider including the block that you share the alley with as well, or is that one that you surveyed as well?
On Pennsylvania, directly to the west of us. Yeah, they were part of that survey as well. Wait, I better confirm that. No, they were not. So I'll just give some background on that survey. When I put forth this PUD, Inglewood planners basically said, "Well, what does the rest of your street feel like? You know, I mean, they're adjacent to you. Where are they at with things?" And it's kind of interesting throughout that process. And correct me if I'm wrong, Audra, but the direction I received from Inglewood was, if we were to rezone your whole street, it would have to match MUR 3C, basically stretching that to our alley. In other words, we would not be able to simply make our street R2B. And I'm guessing that's a procedural thing of why that would be that case. Otherwise, if the question were during that survey, how would you feel about rezoning to R2B, where you could potentially build townhomes? I think that the outcome would have potentially been yes throughout our street. Being that wasn't necessarily an option, my survey was limited to how do you feel about stretching MUR 3C to our alley, which would obviously increase density dramatically, potentially. And then the other was just getting a feel for, well, how do you feel about our PUD that would propose townhomes for these 3 lots, which was resoundingly positive on our street. But as far as MUR 3C, basically nobody would be for that type of density being stretched across to our alley, which would be basically matching what's across the street. So there was very negative feelings about matching what's across the street.
Could you give us a feel? I don't need you to go into a lot of detail, but I didn't find anywhere inside the PU description kind of how this was going to lay out into the future. In terms of changing of property lines, original owners maintain these. Is construction in sequence somehow, or is there a coordinated effort? I mean, again, you can do whatever you want in the end, but generally PUDs are organized as a single kind of process, which so I'm a little, I don't understand how 3 properties under different ownership can reside under a PUD very well. And maybe that's a question for the staff, but I think it would be helpful for you just to explain
where we're at.
How you see it's going to go out.
Yeah, I mean, being that none of the 3 of us are developers, we probably don't have the typical capital that goes into one of these PUDs to where we could potentially just scrape, we have the money ready to go. So I would say that the sequencing is a little bit different. I would say from my perspective, I plan to develop 3333 South Pearl relatively quickly. But again, from my standpoint, I do not have financing at the time either. It's difficult to get the financing until this were to pass. So I think your question is a good one, and we don't have a very clear construction phasing for each of the lots. Basically, once we get the rezone, then we would work on that. But there's definitely not a clear path as far as how these would be phased, being that there are 3 owners. So your concern is certainly valid. I'm trying to understand how they would be developed from a sequence.
So how do we know that, is that on? Oh, it sure is. How do we know that, you develop your property, we get a 3-plex, and maybe the other 2 decide we couldn't get financing, and then what we have is a 3-plex in an R1C zone? I mean, what assurances?
Yeah. I mean, even that to me is not necessarily out of context, given what's across the street, which is a duplex and high-density residential, and given the proximity to Swedish, if the PUD is passed, just the general value that a duplex would bring on that property over a single-family home, there'd be a lot of financial incentive in order to develop as townhomes. So I would say if it passes, it's very likely that they will all be developed as townhomes relatively soon.
Well, and to further what you're getting at there is that my concern is if the other 2 homeowners, current homeowners, if they wait or whatever they want to do, then we would lose perhaps the continuity of the architecture because we really wouldn't have any control over it if they went forward on their own. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, my only statement to that would be there's very little continuity currently. Just looking at this view here. Sorry. So this lower, picture, there's not a lot of continuity in it, which I think is okay. It's eclectic in nature, and that again, I'm designing these homes to where if we were to develop as single-family homes, I don't think it would necessarily look much different. Whereas on my lot, which is an extra large lot, we could build the structure that is shown in our renderings, which I didn't want them to look like repetitive townhomes. I wanted them to potentially go as single-family homes. Whether we achieve that or not, that's another opinion. But given our lot size, we would be able to build this exact structure today.
So if I may, how long have you owned your property?
Let's see. Coming up 1.5 to 2 years.
Okay. And so you have one neighbor who's had it in her family since the 1960s, and another neighbor who's had it for a period of time. How long? 8 years. And so it seems like, your motivation, we've got 2 of the 3 property owners would like to live there in some fashion, whether that's Snowbird and... Right. I mean, assuming it gets built. And then would you also want to live there?
Most likely, no.
Okay. I was just curious because it seems to me that there's you've got one pure economic incentive and another economic incentive and another one that makes a lot of sense from an economic and also from a family perspective. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would say you're right on.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me that there'd be plenty of incentive for everybody to get the job done.
Yeah, correct.
I'd like to clarify something you said earlier. You said that you explored an option of rezoning to R2A or B. Is that correct?
I did talk to the planning department about that, and from what I understood, that wasn't an option.
No, it was not.
So I will,
from Inglewood's standpoint,
redirect my question to the staff at the appropriate time on that, then, because I'm a bit astonished by that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from the commission? I just wanted to find out a little bit more about your background. Obviously, did you come buy this property with this intention, or is this something that you came about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I would say a year and a half ago. I mean, my wife and I have been into just scratching the surface of real estate. We have a few rental condos around Denver and Littleton, and I just kind of keep my eye on opportunities. When this property came up, given the dilapidated structure that was on it, it was a good opportunity for us with the proximity to Swedish Hospital. And I saw it very underutilized as it was with the 700 square foot house from the 1940s in the back. So we bought it. We put a fair amount of money into it as a rental, which is kind of what it'll be, in my opinion. That's another hard part. Looking at developing it as a single family, given what's across the street from us, it's kind of a tough sell, I think, as a single family home. And that's really where it makes sense to develop it as townhomes rather than a single family home.
I want to commend you for talking to the neighbors and trying to fit into the neighborhood. I agree it is a very eclectic neighborhood, and this would be an upgrade in eclecticness, if that's a word. But I am concerned about the affordability aspect, but that's a whole other issue that's much bigger than this. But thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Okay. She didn't have anything? Okay. All right. See, we have a few people. Okay, do we have any public comment? We have a few people signed up. I think some of them already spoke. Scott Braun and Kelly Rhodes. And then we have a couple crossed out. We have an Ian Weekle at 3301 South Pearl. You want to speak?
I do. Ian Weisgold. The address is 3301 South Pearl, so we are just 2 units or 2 houses down, 2 houses north of this proposed development. I'd just like to say that we attended the first neighborhood meeting, and I really appreciated that Mr. Adranya did address our concerns regarding particularly the architectural kind of nature of these townhouses. We were worried that they would stick out more or less like a sore thumb, like I'm sure you're aware some of the other new developments in our neighborhood have and do. They're much boxier. They take up almost all of the property. It's because I think of the zoning, the nature of those areas. So in this transitional zone, I think he's done a good job of incorporating some of the architectural elements that are present in other existing structures, historic structures, and also in not pushing the footprint of the properties to the edges of the lots. They keep front yards and backyards. I also, of course, am excited about the prospect of having a paved alley because we very much want to add a garage onto our house in the back. You've seen it. It's actually this one right here. On the right, that corner, that's our house, and we want to put a garage right there to go back into the alley, and it would be much easier to back out onto or pull in from a paved surface rather than the kind of gravelly whatever it happens to be that day. You know how it is. So those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't think we have anybody else signed up. Are there anybody else that would like to make a comment? Come on up.
Yes.
Please state your name and address.
Britt Fuchs, 3151 South Clarkson Street. So the idea around paving the alleys is a great one, and it just lends to kind of like all the alleys in Inglewood, not just this particular alley. It's a wonderful idea. I think it could benefit everyone in Inglewood for sure. Also, out of just curiosity, I'm wondering if you had an opportunity to look and see around the area what houses or comparable properties are going for $500,000 to $750,000, especially by the helicopters and the, like all of the ambulance, and who would want to invest in a property just across the street from a helicopter. I think that may be kind of why you have apartments and smaller houses. I like what I see. I think it's smart and well done. Those are two things. It's like, is that a lot to ask for a property right there? So, go ahead.
Okay, is there anybody else that would like to make a public comment that didn't sign up?
There was one other person over here, wasn't there?
Okay, go ahead, Audra.
Okay, I did want to point out two things. The reason why this could not be rezoned to an an R2B or an MUR3C is because that would be a rezoning, and in order to rezone, he needs 37,500 square feet of property. He does not have that, so he has enough to do a PUD, which is 21,280 square feet.
So if the entire side of the street was rezoned to R2B, that would be acceptable then?
Yes, that would be acceptable if the entire street was rezoned, because obviously then you would have the 37,000. So that's the reason why he had to go the PUD route as opposed to the rezoning route from the R2 or the MUI3C.
I would ask, because this is a key issue to me, what prevented the whole street from being, or even the whole area between, Broadway and being rezoned to R2B? Was that something that can't be done or could be done, or?
It is something that staff discussed, especially after we found out of the interest in his neighborhood and the interest on his block for being rezoned to R2B. It was a timing issue. It was not on our radar to do it at any time. It's something that I think, as John indicated earlier, that we might be looking at in the future, but it was a timing issue, and the applicant was wanting to have this done sooner than later.
Can a resident initiate an R2 zone change like that?
If they have 37,500 square feet, yes.
Not that they own it, they just have to show that there's enough interest in it, right? I mean, he might not own it, but if the entire block said, we all agree to this, that would be sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to point out was that you had said that possibly they would lose control of design if, for example, the other two homeowners didn't want to do anything for maybe 5 or 10 years. That PUD is still going to be in place, and there are design guidelines that have to be met, and with architectural standards on that they would still have to meet, regardless of when they decided to redevelop their property.
I got another question along that
So
line.
the setbacks and
Go
things
ahead.
like that would stay? Is that what you're saying? Some of the setbacks and things like that would be staying, as well as some of the architectural features?
Whatever is approved in the PUD would govern that property until there was an amendment to amend the property, or there was another rezoning for the property.
So, for example, you couldn't put a fourplex in there. It's restricted to 3 townhomes, 7 townhomes altogether.
Yes.
In the way it's laid out now, you can't switch them around and do anything like that. I mean, that's what a PUD usually is. It tightens it up and makes it required. So if 2 of the property owners decide they didn't want to do it, they could still delay and not do it, but they couldn't decide later on, I want to put 3 in or 4 in. It has to conform to that PUD,
right?
Unless there's an amendment.
Unless there's an amendment,
right.
And they could come forward as an amendment because they are part of this, so they would have enough property to do that.
How would the lot line adjustment process work on those other 2 properties? If they were to wait to develop, would they also be waiting for the lot line adjustment?
Actually, with this, the subdivision would be a different process altogether. It'd be an administrative process, and it'd be something that we would be that would not come in front of you. It would be a simple minor subdivision that we would do administratively.
But on the timing, that would occur when the development happens later on?
Yes, because right now they cannot subdivide the property as long as there is a structure there. Otherwise, you're going to have a property line going down the middle of a house.
And then what, if they were, is there anything that, any kind of work or construction at the properties that would trigger compliance with the PUD? So if they were going to redevelop part of the structures that were there, would they be able to do that, or would they have to then go into compliance with the PUD?
Anything that they would do to this property now would be governed by this PUD. For example, if they wanted to do an addition, the additions would have to meet the requirements, setbacks and lot coverage of the PUD. So anything that they do, and I think it does mention in the PUD, the fences and sheds and things like that are still standard as far as what we have in our regulations now. But any type of work that they did that would require a building permit would have to be met by the PUD.
So I'd like to ask a question that I think is probably, in a sense, not fair, but if the staff can provide any input that they would like to share, I think it would be helpful in the decision process. We clearly have a comprehensive plan that is amenable to this, and I would say that I agree with that this is exactly what we like to see potentially happen in transitions areas like this potentially. My question is more of a philosophical one, in which is the PUD mechanism the way to achieve this, as opposed to a rezoning to a standard zone? And I know that's a subjective question, but I think any input from the staff would be helpful.
As a planner, I would think that just to make things more clean, usually planned unit developments are something a lot different than this. They're typically larger developments, mixing uses, different parking rates, different landscaping. Then they wanted to do something significantly different than the zoning would allow. This is what you have pointed out, that this is very similar to an R2A and R2B zone. It is interesting to me as a planner that the survey that they did that said that, and the comments that was made by the applicant that there would be an appetite for townhomes in this area. That is interesting to me. And it would be much cleaner if you did the entire block face to go to an R2B type zone district. However, but I can also understand where the applicant is coming from, and the fact that he got an indication that this wasn't high on our city's priority list, and he didn't want to wait for that.
But what I'm trying to get at is, what I kind of seeing happening here is potentially a whole bunch of little PUDs everywhere. Which and then and so I'm not sure I like that vision.
And so yes, we may have to, based on this application, to rethink our priority list a little bit. We may have to move this up in the order of what we need to work on in the next few years.
I'll ask the really nitty-gritty question, which is to do a planned unit development, as Ms. Townley mentioned first, is it has to pass these 4 criteria. And the fourth one is the stickler, because I think it passes the first 3 pretty well, and the staff has addressed that. What I don't see in the staff report is support for number 4. In fact, there are 2 parts, A and B. The staff report clearly says that it does not pass muster on B. However, the staff report does not contain anything to support A either in its entirety. It supports the design standards, but it does not, as Ms. Townley pointed out, and would not be possible or practical under a standard zone district with conditional uses or with a reasonable number of zoning variances or administrative adjustments, in which it seems to me most of the discussion tonight has clearly indicated that an R2A or B would be the far superior solution here. So what is the unique characteristic of this property that lets it pass muster on A?
The zoning variances, our zoning board of adjustments, the zoning board of adjustments will not listen to to density.
The Board of Adjustment Appeals.
Yes, I'm sorry. You cannot take anything to them that will increase density.
Right,
and so therefore that's right off the bat.
I understand that. That's my point, is there's nothing unique about this property that would allow it to be under consideration as a planned unit development. It's a standard piece of property. It can be utilized in the way it is. I mean, what makes it unique that it requires a PUD?
Well, I think any property that actually is rezoned to a PUD is a property that can be used the way it typically was zoned for.
No, that's not true at all. PUDs are granted only when it passes muster on number 4, in which it says there are unique characteristics about this property. And we can go through all the PUDs that Englewood has approved, which are about 20 to 25, and you can say, we did a PUD here because this property had these characteristics that made it very difficult for it to be developed any other way. And so that's my entire point, is I do not see what is the unique characteristic of this property that makes it eligible for a PUD.
Can I? Go ahead.
Okay.
What's unique about this, in my opinion, first of all, to get 3 dissimilar. Okay. How's this?
I think we're getting
Is that better?
the discussion phase too.
Okay.
We may be. I was really directing myself to the staff here. I was interested in their opinion.
I think you should just hold it until we
I mean, I think we'll discuss this too, but
Okay.
but does
That's fine.
Can the
I'll
staff
defer.
provide, from a staff perspective, what is the unique characteristic of this property that makes it eligible for it? Because I don't see that it passes number 4, either A or B. And I don't see anything written in the staff's, unlike 1, 2, and 3, in which the staff supports that and provides rationale. I don't see the rationale in the staff, so I'm asking the staff to provide that.
Well, and I'm going to nitpick here too. It doesn't specifically say it has to be unique. I'm sorry. How did you word that?
And it would not be possible or practical under a standard zone district to do what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But we've stated pretty clearly that an R2A or B would be perfect for this kind of development.
It would be. However, that's not possible here because he doesn't have enough area of land to do that.
Well, not as, yeah, I understand that. But if the whole block were R2.
But we're not talking about the whole block. We're talking about these 3 properties right here.
Right.
There is, but we also have regulations that have thresholds on the size of the lot that can be held there. So he would have to have the 37,500 square feet of lot. Another thing also is that the R2B...
I had just another question on that point. So it's not just that it would be possible under a standard zone district, but it wouldn't be possible with conditional uses. So how does the conditional use part of that play into the analysis?
I'll be completely honest. I don't know how and John, you might be able to answer that. I don't know how what conditional use could be granted in order to have this rezoned this way. I don't know why it does say conditional use on there. I don't know of a conditional use that would be acceptable. Do you know one that would work?
You know, typically conditional uses would be something like a limit on the time of day that something can operate. So it would typically be probably more aimed at commercial type uses. So it's hard for me to see that being applied to this development.
That seems like it answers the first half of your question.
No, not at all. You know, I think this is an important issue. Even though I fully would like, in some ways, to see this development occur, through a PUD, it sets an interesting and maybe potentially hazardous precedent.
You're into discussion.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to explain that I'm trying to get the staff to say what is the unique thing about this, and a size is not a unique thing. I mean, just because it's not big enough. I mean, that's true for a PUD itself. You know, if the PUD isn't big enough, you can't do it. But generally, PUDs are put into play because there's some constraint on the property. And that's the way it's always been. There's some constraint that doesn't allow for development to occur.
I disagree with that. Usually, in my experience, a PUD happens when somebody has property and the uses that are associated with the property that they have are not the use that they want to use that property for. For example, you have an industrial property, you want to do residential there. That's not permitted, so you have to apply for a PUD. The property itself, there may be nothing unique about it, other than the fact that the owner of the property would like to do another use there than what's permitted.
Well, then we would agree to disagree, because,
Okay.
I mean, I read it through here, and I say that it's not possible or practical, basically, to do anything with this property, and clearly there is. You can certainly put single-family homes on it, so I still don't think it passes muster. But if you don't have anything further to say, that my question is directed to the staff. So.
Okay,
Thank
I'd
you.
like to make a motion we close the public hearing. Any other questions?
Yeah. Have multiple residents ever gotten together in the past to form a PUD, or is this unique?
This is unique. From my experience, this is unique. Yes.
Okay.
What way?
The way that he just stated, that
Multiple residents getting together to form a PUD, and that there is no requirement in PUDs that they be owned by one entity.
No, they can be owned by multiple people,
Interesting.
parties.
Okay.
And with that, I make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I should see if there's any other questions first.
Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions?
Going to the uniqueness question, I would say one factor that is somewhat unique to ours is the relationship to having an R1 zone district that's directly adjacent to high-density residential across the street. I think you just typically like to see those zone changes happen at the alley to complete that context of the street. So I would say that perhaps would be a unique factor that would make single-family development a little bit less financially viable, having high-density apartments directly across the street, whereas townhomes fit in a little bit better contextually with what's directly across the street.
Motion on the floor.
Okay. We have a motion to close. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All righty. Roll call.
Ms. Townley?
Are we to close the
Close the public hearing.
Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Petitos?
Yes.
Mr. Brick?
Yes.
Mr. Fish?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Madrid?
Yes.
And Chair Kinton?
Yes.
The hearing is now closed.
Okay. All right. Can we have a motion on case ZON 2017-002 at 333 South Pearl Street.
I move that we approve case ZON 2017-002 for South Pearl Street.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Oh, we have discussion.
Yeah, we have discussion. Yeah. Okay. Who wants to start off the discussion?
Well, probably Mike, since he got cut off.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you continue?
Well, I don't know that maybe I want to start, but I will. I will, because it does not preclude me in the future from making additional comments. First of all, I think it's really unique. I think the motivation is there by the applicant, or the three property owners that make up the applicant as one. Secondly, with regard to any just good practice of zoning, to go from a single family to an extremely dense, highly intensive use, which is right across the street, it really does. There's a huge difference in character of the neighborhood. I think and you may or may not agree, but I think that what makes this unique, first of all, is the environment in which staff operates and the city is required to respond to is much more dynamic than what it has been in the past. As such, it does necessitate a change of priority, particularly when there's somebody who wants to create a series of properties that are going to be worth a few $1 million plus, and want to have the density of the property or the lot coverage of the property less than what it would be if they were to be rezoned, and a 9,400 square foot lot, while it is not in and of itself a unique, standalone, one-of-a-kind lot in Englewood, it is roughly 46% larger than the average lot in Englewood. And understanding that in and of itself makes it, by the time you add up those three lots combined, we come in somewhere in the neighborhood of around 20-some thousand square feet, I believe. That being the case, I think that makes it a great opportunity. Now, the question is, do we have the ability to move forward with this, particularly given the fact that the neighborhood wants it, that I think inherently the city would like to see this, but from a planning perspective are not ready to respond given all the other pressures at this point, through no disrespect to the city and the staff working hard. And I just think it makes a great deal of sense. And so the question comes, can we be flexible enough, and are we willing to be flexible enough? We have the latitude. Are we willing to be flexible enough in order to do something that gets a home off the alley and puts a facade up there that adds three properties on 3333, two properties on 3323, and 3317 that have all said they'd like to do this with their property, but for the fact we don't have the details and we didn't necessarily get ahead of this as a city. And so those are my initial thoughts on it. I'll see if I can form the rest of them as we go.
Well, thank you, Mike.
I'd like to ask you a question, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Ron a question. You were around during the medical small area plan, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Does your recollections match John's in terms of what we bounced back and forth? Because I remember we did at least discuss this. I can hear Chad's voice in my ear on the this being some kind of transition area there, and recently I think we all have been here, with the exception of maybe you, to hear this transition. Does John's statements match your recollection of what was said at that time?
Yes, very much so. We did not discuss this particular area. The area we discussed was north of this and west of this, in fact, west of Logan. And it was really, in some ways, a different kind of discussion. But, yeah, it was similar in the sense that it's a transition zone. However, the result of that was the neighborhood did not want to go that direction, and an overlay was placed to downzone the area back to single family, as I recall. Is that not correct? We put an overlay over that area, and
yes,
maybe I should say
over
the
by
council
on Grant Street, there's an overlay there that allows only single family and two family properties to be redeveloped on any property there. Any apartment building that's larger than that can be redeveloped at its current density plus a certain percentage. Right. But any existing single family or two family home can only be replaced with a single family or two family home on that street.
So a very similar thing, except for actually going different directions, actually. One is increasing density, the other is decreasing.
I think my hang-up, I really like this, by the way. I like the fact you've looked at the quality of the and the blendability of your design, and I think there is enough across the street. The thing that's hanging me up right now, and the reason I asked you that question, Ron, I can't remember, Kate, you may have been there during the medical, I can't remember, okay. But I'm having trouble in that I think that we've yet to explore, which is what you're using as the rationale. I'm going to do what Ron did to you on number 4. On number 1, we've yet to explore this in terms of the comp plan, and that right now this particular PUD is premature. Do we feel that, you know, and again, we've talked about it before, that one PUD does not set a precedent. In other words, in fact, I remember Nancy Reed saying that, and we can ask Father Comer there whether it does, but my understanding is that that a PUD does not set any kind of precedent. So we may choose it on the basis of other things. But I'm stuck on the fact we haven't done that exploration. I'm just throwing that out.
Well, I don't think I've already expressed most of my opinions, but I'll just summarize real quickly. Number 1, I think it is a nice development. I mean, I have no problem with that. And I think this area needs to go that direction. So I don't have tremendous opposition to it from the perspective of that I think it's an appropriate development for that area. It is a transition zone, and this is what we like to see happen. My hang-up is that I think we're stepping outside of a process that was designed for something entirely different, and that there's another process. Rezoning the entire block or even several blocks was a much more rational decision in a lot of ways. Granted, it takes more time. I get that, but the whole point of this commission is not to instantly gratify everyone who wants to do some little thing. And, the market's there. I agree the market moves fast in the city. It always has, always will. To say that the city's going to be ahead of the market is pretty ludicrous. I can't ever kind of imagine that, and it shouldn't be. But what it should do is provide a framework of rules that are consistent so that everybody knows and can play the game on a playing level field. And I just don't believe that a PUD here is an appropriate way to go. But again, I like the development too. And I think ultimately that area will be rezoned. And I don't know what happens to the PUD then. I think it's my understanding that if it rezones, it may, and it's within that, it'll just kind of go that way. But I don't know. PUDs are forever, though. They never expire. And I don't think it's in the Commission's interest or the city's interest to simply throw PUDs out there whenever they kind of seems appropriate, no matter what the reason for it. So that's my opinion.
Mike? Because you kind of, in other words, you're saying, hey, let's be proactive. Because, again, it doesn't set a precedent. We can do this, and somebody can come 3 houses down and do the same thing, and this PUD does not set any precedent.
Yeah, you're right. They could zone it the 3 blocks down as commercial. And you can have a whole little mishmash of different zones all over the place. And one house is this zone, one house is this zone. I mean, that's the problem with small PUDs like this, is it creates these little micro zones everywhere that are hard to manage. from a certain perspective. But again, I don't think this is a bad development, so I'm not going to harass it anymore.
Well, I appreciate you calling on me again, John.
I like you, Mike.
Oh, I tell you what, John, I often think of you, and I'm very fond. But it would seem to me, to your point, and to answer your question, we have yet to explore, that I don't agree with. We're doing that at this point. And an academic exercise in exploring what would be the purpose of point number one would simply be an academic exercise in futility, because none of these people would have an opinion that have shown up here presumably for this, or the neighbors wouldn't have an opinion in our academic exercise. They did, however, have an opinion regarding 3 properties being redeveloped to a tune which presumably, as a matter of personal opinion, and through no disrespect to current property owners, are not going to redevelop their properties, but a more attractive, more modern look. Okay, so to that extent, we've explored that in a real life manner, and that's been going on now for a few months. So that is commendable, happening regardless. I think that that ultimately staff had alluded to the fact that they may need to redo priorities or move this forward. And John, I think you also said perhaps we should look at that a little bit differently, and I think in terms of transition zones throughout the city. So what is a reasonable expectation of a transition zone from a very low density single family to the high density right across the street? What other neighborhoods should we look at and say, what's a reasonable redevelopment in there, and begin to have that conversation? Not tomorrow, but begin to have that conversation, okay? And I think that makes a lot of sense. Given the fact it doesn't necessarily set a precedent for anything, and nobody can come and hold our feet to the fire, it does allow for, and what's proposed in front of us is a lower density of lot coverage, or a lower lot coverage than what zoning would be. And so consequently, we're actually getting, quote unquote, more, if you will, green space than we otherwise could have if somebody said, well, here, we're going to change the zoning. And so, in my opinion, I think we're already doing the exploration. So far, it hasn't been painful, and I'm thankful we have this in front of us.
Okay, can we have thank you for you guys both eloquently can put the biggest issue, the different sides of that. And is there somebody else?
I just had a question, I guess, maybe of the other commission members, and I agree that the development itself, it meets what we have in the comp plan. The comp plan's visionary, it's not legally binding. Zoning change is legally binding. So can you help me see what evidence that we have here that this can't be accomplished in another existing zone district?
You could rezone the block R2A or B, and it would be fine.
Are there any other comments?
The only other comment that I have is that that's not, when I'm looking at 1A, it's not allowed or practicable under in a standard zone district. But then the other 2 provisions that are in here are with conditional uses. And Audra testified that this isn't a situation where a conditional use can fix the problem.
That's with the existing zoning, in my interpretation, that we have zoning where you could have a triplex or...
Yeah, I think as Audrey stated, the conditional use would have to be associated to the existing zone. So it would be a conditional zone, a conditional use to the R1C zone. And there's no such conditional zone or a variance that can be granted that would allow for townhomes, because the Board of Adjustment Appeals is not allowed to change density through a variance. And a conditional use, as John pointed out, is not, again, not associated to density or those kinds of issues. That's a zoning characteristic, not a conditional use. Zones can have conditional uses, but they're not an infinite number of conditional uses. In fact, each zone is its own set of conditional uses.
That's, I think, just making my point that that's why how you get to satisfaction of that criteria, that a variance or going to the Board of Adjustment of Appeals or conditional use isn't a mechanism to satisfy what they're proposing.
Right, but they could certainly use this the way it is now with no problem. It's not, I guess my point, and whether you agree or not, is that this property is not really that unique in any way that makes it need to have a PUD is often used to alleviate a problem so that because it can't be developed. And this can clearly be developed in a number of ways. I mean, within R1C. But that's typically the use of a PUD, is that there are certain characteristics of the property that make it hard to shape, easements, whatever, and I just don't see any of those. But you're right. I mean, you're not supposed to put townhomes in an R1C. That's very true. But you're not. That's the whole point of an R1C. So you can't do what they want to do under an R1C no matter what. You'd have to change the zone to something else or put into place a PUD.
And the wording on it also says, and would not be possible or practicable under a standard zone district, not the existing standard zone district.
Yeah.
So we have those zone districts available right now.
That can handle townhomes, right? And yeah. In fact, the only ones that don't do it are R1s, A, Bs, and Cs. You can put them in a lot of other zones,
Is it everyone's pleasure to call for the question?
If there are no more questions or discussion.
We have a second?
We already have a motion on the table.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is just saying, should
Okay.
we make that vote?
Yep, call for the question.
Are you calling the question, Chair?
Yeah, I'm calling
Yeah.
for the question.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and do the roll call on the vote.
Chair Kinton, is that what you would like to do?
Yes.
Ms. Townley?
I really appreciate all the time. I really appreciate all the time that went into this application and all the engagement that occurred with the other members of the block and in the neighborhood. I do think there are definitely elements of the application that meet goals and objectives in our current comprehensive plan. But in my interpretation of the criteria that we need to meet in order to approve a PUD, I do not feel like I have enough evidence to support a finding of fact to say that we meet the criteria and that it can be approved, mainly because there are existing zone districts within the community that can support both duplexes and triplexes, townhomes, and that I think by having a PUD, it's basically just putting in a patchwork where it looks like, from the survey and other information that there's momentum in the neighborhood to rezone more than just that small piece of property, and I think that's a more comprehensive solution or something that we should explore. So I vote no.
Ms. Austin?
I agree with some of Kate's points, but I do also think this is a very thoughtful development. I really like the landscaping and the coverage of, we've seen some developments that to me didn't have as much landscaping that I would like to see. I do think that it is possible that we need to look at rezoning areas of the city, but that's impractical right at this point. So I vote yes for the project.
Mr. Patinos?
I vote no because the subsection F1A and 1B I don't think can be satisfied for the same reasons that Ms. Townley stated, that when I'm going through this and trying to make this project, which I really like, I think it fits in the neighborhood, I think it's great for Swedish Hospital, I think it's great for the businesses in the area, but I find myself trying to play word games on how to fit the project into the criteria. It's not a development that wouldn't be allowed in a different zone district with conditional uses or with administrative adjustments. And, so I don't find that it meets F1A. F1B, I don't think there's any question that that can't be satisfied because the property can be developed under existing zoning, even through the use of conditional uses or administrative adjustments.
Mr. Brick?
This is one I'm really torn on, and I'm usually pretty opinionated. My concern is still that we have the opportunity to explore this area and create a situation either way. You know, if the other neighbors come forward and say, no, we're not interested and so forth. But my reason for asking the initial questions is we've kind of, you know, bounced back and forth on this particular thing, on whether this should be a transition area, how much of a transition area, how much residential. The thing that's making me torn is God, I can't believe it. I'm agreeing with Mike here that this could be a very pragmatic single situation in that we could say, okay, with no precedent, that we like this and this is something that's good for the city. Do you agree, Mr. Comer, that I could feel that way, or would I be leaving something out?
It's your decision.
All right.
How you feel.
Yeah, you know, and this is really tough. In other words, it would be pragmatic because the only problem I have, and now I've heard Kate's objections, and boy, this one's tough. But on a very pragmatic level, and the fact that we've heard no negative responses from the community around this particular piece of property and the quality of it, I'm going to say yes, but again, I want to echo the sentiments of all who want to look at it in a different way, in a different light. So you got a yes there.
Okay. Mr. Fish?
So I think Kate is far more eloquent than I am, and I essentially agree 100% with you that while this is great and exactly what the comprehensive plan wants to do and what you want to see happen in Anglo in these transition areas, the mechanism of the PUD is simply doesn't pass muster for me. It doesn't meet criteria for A or B, which means it really can't be a PUD. And I strongly disagree with the statement that this does not set a precedent. I think this very much sets a precedent, and I think it sets a bad precedent in that, in essence, it's a distortion of the PUD process. And I'm not terribly concerned about it because it's not going to do something that's bad. It's actually going to do something that's good. But nonetheless, it's a distortion of the PUD, and that's what disturbs me more than anything else. And the potential for further PUDs to come to play that are essentially similar and say, well, they did it over there, why can't we do it here? I would never propose that simply because the market is moving rapidly in one direction that the city simply throw away its rules and, do what's expedient. So I vote no.
Mr. Coleman?
So I'm going to echo some of the sentiments. This is definitely a difficult one, and I've certainly been torn. When I first was reading this, I mean, one of the questions that had come to my mind is why PUD? I haven't been on the commission all that long. I've only seen, I think, one other, maybe two others, and it was for large apartment complexes, and that made sense for what the underlying purpose of the PUD was, and I understood that, and it made sense to move it forward. PUDs are by their nature ad hoc. You create new zoning for them, while I like also this project, I do think this is the direction it needs to go. The fact that there are other avenues to do this, and rather than creating a whole new zoning, while the city does have these other avenues to do it. For those reasons, I vote no.
Thank you. John, we have agreed on things before, and we do again tonight. I'm voting yes. Frankly, I think we do have the latitude. I do think it is a push of what the definition of a PUD could be. But I think based on this, I think we like to see that happen. And I just believe we have the latitude in order to do that. Because to everybody's point, a PUD by definition is an ad hoc zoning. And in this case, it's somewhat unusual in that normally whenever we have a PUD in front of us, it's my impression that we have people all around saying, oh, how dare you let them do this? And we don't have that tonight. We don't have that in any of the evidence before us. We don't have that in any circumstance. And so I think it begs the question the other way is, should we take the latitude in order to do this? Not can we. I think can we, the answer to that is in the affirmative. The answer to should we is also, in my opinion, in the affirmative. So I would vote yes.
I think this is a great development. It's the type of development we want in that area, according to the city plan. It's very well thought out. So I'd like to see this project go through. I don't think that a PUD is the right way to approach this property. I'd like to ask the council or the city planning to move ahead, to move this further onto the docket, and let's change this to a R2B zone. But right now, I can't vote for a PUD for this property.
Chair Kinton?
Well, I don't think my vote matters at this point, but nevertheless, I mean, this is definitely one that I'm torn on. But my sentiment is a bird in the hand, and we might rezone this and not get nearly this quality of development, and that's a concern. On the other hand, it's a concern that's been expressed. You set a precedent that we don't want to set for doing things that aren't appropriate for a PUD. But nevertheless, in the bird in the hand philosophy, I'm going to go ahead and vote yes, even though I think the vote has been decided. Thanks.
Okay, motion denied 4-5.
All righty. I guess that we move on now to the topic of the evening, public hearing, case 201401 on accessory dwelling units.
Move that we open case 201401 accessory dwelling units.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All righty. Then we take roll call.
Yes, I do. My name is John Voboril. I'm with the Inglewood Community Development Department, Planner 2. And I'm the staff source here this evening to go over case number 2014-01, accessory dwelling unit regulatory amendments to Title 16 of the Unified Development Code of the City of Inglewood. I have here proof of publication of the public hearing published in the August 24th edition of Inglewood Herald, and also published on the city's website from August 24th through September 6th. Staff recommends to the Planning and Zoning Commission the following findings and motions pending deliberations by the Commission concerning case number 2014-01, accessory dwelling unit regulatory amendments to Title 16 of the Unified Development Code of the City of Inglewood. That case number 2014-01 was brought before the Planning and Zoning Commission at a public hearing by the City of Inglewood Community Development Department. That notice of the public hearing was published in the Inglewood Herald on August 24th, 2017, and that notice was provided to the Inglewood City Clerk to be published on the city's website through September 6, 2017. that participants in the June 13th accessory dwelling unit open house meeting were notified of the public hearing directly by email. That the Inglewood Community Development Department held 13 study sessions on accessory dwelling units over 2 distinct time periods and made preparations for an accessory dwelling unit open house meeting held on June 13, 2017, from which 51 surveys were collected and analyzed. The accessory dwelling units were historically developed in Inglewood in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. That the proposed accessory dwelling unit regulatory text amendments establish purpose, format, eligibility, creation, occupancy, and design parameters for accessory dwelling units and identifies the MUR3B, MUR3A, R2B, R2A, and R1C zone districts as suitable for new accessory dwelling unit development. That the proposed accessory dwelling unit regulatory text amendments conform to the vision, goals, and objectives outlined in Inglewood Forward, the 2016 Inglewood Comprehensive Plan. And finally, that the proposed accessory dwelling unit regulatory text amendments be forwarded to City Council with a favorable recommendation for adoption. At this time, I would just quickly want to go over the record of Commission action on accessory dwelling units. The establishment of accessory dwelling units as a high priority work item took place at the December 2nd, 2014 study session. That was quickly followed up by a series of study sessions on accessory dwelling units, and the dates for those were January 9th, February 3rd, February 18th, March 2nd, June 2nd, June 16th, and July 7th of 2015. At this time, there was a pause in accessory dwelling units for a number of different reasons. The first reason was that Inglewood Forward, which included the new comprehensive plan, as well as the Inglewood Light Rail Corridor Next Step Study and the Inglewood Walk and Wheel Master Plan were all being finalized and needed the attention of the Planning and Zoning Commission. At the same time, there were also a lot of different development cases that were coming through at the same time. And then we also lost the main staff person who was working on accessory dwelling units at that time. A decision was made that we needed to first adopt the comprehensive plan before we moved on with accessory dwelling units. The new comprehensive plan was adopted in spring of 2016, and with that, a new staff person was assigned to handle accessory dwelling units, and a new series of study sessions was undertaken in the fall of 2016. And the dates for those were September 20th, October 4th, October 18th, November 8th, and December 6th of 2016, and a final one was held on January 18th, 2017. At this time, it was suggested by a Planning and Zoning Commission member that it would be a good idea to touch base with the community to let them know about these different regulations and let them get a good understanding of them and get some feedback on them. So at that point, a open house community event began to be planned, and that was scheduled for June 13th, 2017, in order so that it could be advertised to the entire citizenry through the new Inglewood Citizen magazine, which went out in May. The Inglewood Planning and Zoning Commission held a preparation for the open house event on June 6, 2017, and then commenced with a open house meeting on June 13, 2017. The results from the surveys were then compiled and analyzed by the Planning and Zoning Commission at the July 18, 2017 study session. At this time, I'd just like to give you a little bit of a background and analysis. In terms of history of accessory dwelling units, the City of Inglewood has a long history with these developments. In the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, approximately 180 of these structures were built in Inglewood to address housing shortages. What happened after that was that we had the explosion of suburbia, and housing shortages were a thing of the past, and ADUs fell out of favor and were subsequently removed from most zoning ordinances in the United States. However, in the 1990s, accessory dwelling units began making a comeback, especially in very expensive and tight housing markets, and particularly in the northwestern United States. And now here in the Denver metro area, we find ourselves, we are back to the future, and we are now in a state of incredible housing shortages as well. And we are also getting pressures from citizenry who also see some opportunities there for some additional income and would like to build some of these. Benefits of accessory dwelling units. There's a number of different benefits that can arise from the building of these properties in terms of property investment value, additional income to the homeowner, alternative housing options so that some people not everyone wants to rent in a large apartment building and would like something that's more affordable, yet more closer to a single family residence to live in. Infrastructure efficiency, you don't need to build a lot of infrastructure with these. The infrastructure is already in place and you can utilize that in a more efficient fashion. Life cycle stage housing options, so many people would like to house an older mother or father so that they can keep an eye on them, yet they can have some independence, or they might have some older children who have not yet established themselves financially, and this is kind of gives them a little bit of an autonomy. It can support the local economy, bringing in more people to the Broadway corridor that would patronize some of the local businesses. And finally, it also gives an opportunity to bring in new citizens to our community who may, as they mature and gain economic ground, may become future homeowners in the city of Inglewood. Now at this time, I would just like to kind of go over the details of the amendments. There are 5 officially declared purposes of ADUs. Number 1, provide options for varied and flexible lifestyle arrangements. Provide options for alternative building structures, living space. Number 3, provide potential supplemental sources of income. 4, increase property values, encourage higher levels of property maintenance. 5, provide options for building structures, living space expansion, while simultaneously encouraging preservation of existing structures. ADU format. ADUs can take on many different varieties of shapes and sizes. Our proposal has designated 2 types of ADUs, the garden cottage, which is a freestanding structure located in the rear yard, and the carriage house above or attached to a detached garage. In terms of ADU eligibility for lot sizes, they will be eligible for 1 unit detached dwelling standard lot with a 50-foot minimum width. You may do on these lots 1 garden cottage or 1 carriage house. For a smaller lot, a 1 unit detached dwelling small lot with a 37-foot minimum width, you will be able to do a carriage house unit only. ADU creation, they are created in the following manner, either by new construction or conversion of a qualifying alley house located in the rear yard to a garden cottage while simultaneously constructing a new principal dwelling in the front yard. We also have designated ADU occupancy requirements. The owner of record with a 50% minimum ownership must occupy either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit as their legal permanent address as demonstrated by voter and vehicle registration. The owner shall verify on an annual basis the owner continues to occupy either the principal dwelling unit or the accessory dwelling unit as their legal permanent address through the city's annual conforming ADU registered use mailing. Owner must reside on the property for a minimum of 9 months of the year. The owner may not rent the owner's legal residence without applying for a leave of absence. If owned by a corporation, the property must be occupied by a person authorized to bind such entity in real estate matters. In order to apply for a leave of absence, the following must be met. The situations that are allowed are temporary job assignments, military deployments, educational and research sabbaticals, formal voluntary service for a humanitarian organization, religious missionary service, and long-term hospital, nursing home, and assisted living facility stays due to adverse medical conditions. The owner must reside in the property for at least 1 year after construction of the ADU before applying to the city for a leave of absence. The owner may apply for a city-approved leave of absence up to 1 year and may reapply for a second year depending on a clean record with no code violations or nuisance or criminal activities. The owners away on overseas military services may be granted additional years based on a clean record. During approved leave of absence, owner may rent both the principal dwelling unit and the accessory dwelling unit at the same time. In terms of ADU design requirements, number 1, an ADU should not exceed 650 square feet of gross floor area. Number 2, exterior stairs for access to an upper-level accessory suite shall not be located on the side of the accessory structure parallel to the nearest side lot line. Number 3, an ADU shall not exceed a maximum height of 26 feet. Number 4, the lot coverage for a garden cottage ADU shall be counted toward the maximum allowed lot coverage. Number 5, ADU placement is restricted to the 35% rear of the lot. 6, ADUs must conform to all existing accessory structure setbacks. Number 7, a bulk plane height of 12 feet will be established at the side property lines. Number 8, 1 off-street parking space shall be provided for each accessory dwelling unit. Number 9, ADUs must connect to the principal dwelling unit water and sewer lines. Separate lines are not allowed. And number 10, ADU properties may not be subdivided. ADUs may not be sold separately from the primary structure. The allowed zoning districts for ADUs will be as follows. MUR 3B, mixed-use medium to high-density residential limited office. MUR 3A, mixed-use low-density residential and limited office. R2B, medium-density single and multi-dwelling unit residential. R2A, low-density single and multi-dwelling unit residential. And finally, R1C, single-unit residential. The ADU regulatory code amendments conform to the goals and objectives found in Inglewood 4, the 2016 Inglewood Comprehensive Plan. Goal Live 1 states, promote a balanced mix of housing opportunities serving the needs of current and future Inglewood citizens. Under that, Objective Live 1.1 states, allow for housing that meets the needs of all income groups, including appropriate type and location of housing. And Objective Live 1.2 states, allow for housing investments that improve the housing mix and serve different life cycle stages and groups with special needs in appropriate locations, including both smaller and larger unit sizes and a wider range of housing types, including single-family, duplex, townhome, condominium, multifamily, and accessory dwelling units. At this point, I would like to conclude my presentation to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I would be happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Are there any questions? Okay, we've discussed this at a great length. I guess we'll...
I have a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I guess one procedural question. So we'll make recommendations tonight for language to put forward to the City Council, and there would still be an opportunity for City Council to make changes to what would be in these recommendations as well?
Yes, they may amend them.
Okay.
I guess I have a procedure question too, not on the regulations at all. But in the staff report.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fish, could you speak to the mic?
Sure. Past all the changes and designations, which as the chair has stated that we've discussed a lot, there's a by authority. It's clearly a legal document, a bill for the ordinance, and there's a bunch of things in there. I just was wondering, I can't remember ever seeing that in any of our public hearings.
Which
Maybe
page are you
had
looking at?
them, But I don't know what they are. It says page 1, but it's way at the end of all the, I guess it's past all the tables, and then there's this page. Can you just tell us what this is? I mean,
the city attorney was asked, kind of given a heads up. I think it was also beneficial for them to get a head start on this, but we decided that let's go ahead and put this into the actual ordinance format that would go to council.
Okay.
So that's what you are seeing. This is what council would see.
So are we approving that as well?
You were just recommending that this be adopted.
Okay, so what this says in here is not what we're recommending. I mean, didn't come from the commission.
This is just simply the whereases that are kind of standard for an ordinance.
Okay.
It borrows heavily from the staff report whereases and the recommendations that say that this and this, that this and this. Also, I have also written a staff report for City Council, and that was also used to compile these whereas statements. But following those whereas statements, then it goes into what the code will look like in terms of black line, underlined.
Which is all the work that we've done.
Yes.
We aren't really part of this legal process here, if I understand that correctly.
We are ahead of the game.
Ahead of the game, okay.
All right, are there any other questions?
I have a question about the code contents, but I didn't know if I should hold that or ask now. Ask now.
Go ahead.
We have the list of purposes that the commission put together in order to kind of guide our recommendations for the code change, and those are currently in the code change. I'm wondering, are those going to be used? Like, would an applicant need to prove that they are meeting one of those purposes, or I was trying to think of what it was called, certain situations, I think it's how it's written. Do you have to prove that in order to be able to apply to build one?
No, they just kind of set the stage for what comes after, and explains the reasoning for allowing these ADUs again.
I was going to say, I don't think it's uncommon in the rest of the code for that to happen throughout. I've seen that in a number of the places in the code. They start discussing something and they say, the reason for this is da-da-da-da. And so it's not unusual.
That's probably correct. And also, I do know that the previous staff person started with a kind of a model code skeleton, and that was how it was laid out, that it was started out with some purposes statements. And so I think that's how it has developed, and so it is common.
All right, are there any other questions?
Yeah, I've one question about the code. There's a portion that I didn't see, or I don't recall discussing, and it's on page 3. It is a C7F3, and it says approval of application is dependent on the city inspection of existing primary structure.
Wait, can you wait for us to, where are we?
Page 3.
Page what? Page
3
well,
of the
it's
bill.
28 of 35, but at the bottom it's labeled page 3.
Page 3. Okay.
It says approval of application is dependent on city inspection of existing primary structure. All primary structure deficiencies and code violations documented in the city's pre-ADU permit inspection must be brought into full compliance with city housing and building code standards for ADU. Can you describe the depth of that? Because maybe somebody roughed in a toilet that's 15 inches or 11 inches off a wall, and code today is 15 inches off the wall. You know, so how deep are they going to go into code compliance of the existing structure to build an accessory dwelling in the back?
It's more about life. It's more like it would follow the property maintenance codes from the UDC, and it would be more geared towards hazards and life safety issues and habitability.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
I think one of the things that's very germane here is that carriage houses are above garages. Normally a garage doesn't put a fire break in its ceiling, but then you would have to. So that's the kind of issues that would be developed.
That's in the new construction, but that statement is referring to pre-existing conditions in the original structure, in the front house.
Well, I think even if you had something that was being like a carriage house and it really wasn't being used as a carriage, you'd have to bring it up to code.
Yeah. What's written here is referring to the front house that's not under construction.
I think we're getting a little into
Prior
discussion.
section addresses that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. No, the subsection 2 deals with the structure that's being built, and subsection 3 deals with the primary structure.
Okay.
All right, keep going.
Okay. All righty. Are we ready to move on? Okay, we have about a dozen people that signed up for public comment, although some of them had second thoughts, I think. But let's see, we have Rebecca Alexis. If you want to come forward and be sworn.
My name is Rebecca Alexis. I live at 1982 South Pennsylvania Street. That's in Denver. I don't live here. So I'm an architect and a retired contractor. I have been passionate about these ADUs since 2007 when I heard that Denver was considering them in their 2010 zoning. And I worked very hard going to neighborhoods and trying to explain what the benefits were of these ADUs, and you listed certainly a lot of them. A couple more is that it allows people to stay in their home if they need to make additional income or have a caregiver. It also puts more eyes on the alley, which reduces crime, less graffiti, less break-ins. And I really like what you guys are proposing. I think it's a lot better than Denver. For example, the cottage house option. Your height limit of 26 feet is better than Denver's 24. Oh, I get nervous talking in front of people. Creating an off-street parking space. Denver doesn't require it, but I think it's excellent. Arvada does require it. I think it's smart. And I think the biggest concern about these ADUs, from what I hear, is parking. And you are helping to solve that. My only recommendation is allowing attached ADUs as well, because although an ADU offers housing, more housing, which is needed, it's not really affordable. These little jewels are very costly. And if you could allow an attached ADU, I think you would get more of these. So far, Denver's only permitted about 250 ADUs, and I don't even think it's that high, since 2010. That's not very many, and I'd like to see a lot more of these. I think that's about all I had to say. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person I have on the list is a Rebecca Brian Pearson. Is Brian here? No. Okay.
My name is Brian Pearson. I live at 2962 Montclair Court, Highlands Ranch. I, too, am an architect, and I've been working within the Denver city confines for the last 3-4 years working on ADUs. And I'd like to say thank you that you guys are getting on board with the ADU situation. A couple of comments. I think there's one more beneficial item to ADUs, is that when you undertake this kind of project, it's outside of your house. If you do a carriage house or a standalone against an alley, you're not disrupting your household. You are building something new. It doesn't disrupt you, your family. You don't have contractors, subcontractors roaming through your property, your house, and you don't have to secure it quite the same way. You still secure the site, but your main residence is still pretty much well protected. So that's another benefit to ADUs, aside from all the other ones that have been stated. A couple of comments. I've noticed in the language that you have, item 1, no stairs going up to the second level if you have a carriage house over a garage on the side portion of it. I don't know why you would want to limit that kind of access. It does change your access into the upper level ADU as opposed to just encroaching further into the space that you have in the backyard. It can be a straight run stair. Perhaps it's a a stair that's just a little bit outside the perimeter, and it's an L-shaped stair. I don't quite understand the language, and I think from an architectural and a construction point of view, that needs to be clarified a little bit better. If you have a 50-foot wide lot, you're looking at 4 feet probably to have a stair to the side. And secondly, I don't see a provision that Denver does have, which is rather limiting, for second level decks. There's no mention of decks. Denver doesn't allow them. And you have to go through a whole nother procedure to get a deck, whether it's on the side, to the alley, or even to the backyard, within that 35% backyard zone lot area. So just something that I saw within your language, and perhaps there may be some clarification of that coming up. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The next person on the list is Jeff Stillwell.
My name's Jeff Stillwell. I live at 2935 South Marion Street. I'm relatively new to this, to the idea of an ADU, and read through the documents, and so I probably missed things. I read through it quickly. In the allowed zoning districts, it shows for single unit residential zones only R1C. And I was wondering if I didn't see any explanation why you specifically excluded R1B and R1A. And I think that's, yeah, the other qualifications for how your property, the qualifications that I would have to meet, it seems like R1A, which is the largest of the single unit residential zones, would meet all the other criteria. That's it.
Thank you. Let's see. The next person on the list would be Cynthia Sirtas. Cynthia here?
It's coming.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Sirfos. I live at 3297 South Downing Street. That's the yellow house on the corner. I don't want these in my neighborhood. I live in the yellow house on the corner. I live in a residential community on purpose. I don't appreciate the tremendous increase in congestion in Inglewood, the tremendous increase in traffic, noise, crime, the tremendous decrease in city services in Inglewood with the growth of population. My neighbors don't appreciate it. We have the monstrosity at the end of the block at Corona and Girard, which is a neighborhood travesty, so I guess that's a transition area. I don't think any R1C, A, B should have an accessory dwelling unit because they say in their own code that they're going to determine that the other property on your residential property is a household, so then you automatically have 2 residences on your property, so that's no longer a single family property, that's a 2-family property. So what is the difference, and how is that going to protect our residential communities from becoming these magical transition communities where they do these lovely things like slap up the monstrosity that they have at the end of Corona and Girard, which is a neighborhood disaster. And it's just not the nature of a residential community. And they say here that they want to maintain the atmosphere of a residential community. That is not the atmosphere of a residential community. And neither are the lovely chicken coops that they put up at the corner of what Logan and Floyd, all those chicken coops are just charming. So I don't think that it is in the nature of a residential community. I don't think it adds anything to my area, and neither do my neighbors, by the way.
Thank you very much. I have a Paul J. Kaczynski. Okay, thank you. The next person, let's see here. Joycelyn Body?
Jared or Janet Betts.
Yeah, 2961 East Bannock. No. Okay, we'll move on to, let's see, Madden at 605 Amherst. Oh, okay. Okay, no, we don't require you to speak. That's fine. Let's see. We have a Randall Friesen. Yeah.
Do you swear to tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission? Okay, please speak.
Randall Friesen, 4581 South Cherokee Street. I really just wanted to echo most of what planning has put forward here as far as the benefits for all this. I really see this as helping the diversity of our city, bringing a few more people in without a major influx like we're seeing with all the apartments and everything. I really see it as an opportunity for families to stay together. In my particular case, I bought a little alley house about a year ago. I plan to scrape it, put a house on for myself. In the meantime, I've put my daughter, 30-year-old, in. She's renting that house from me. If this goes, we have a little family compound, and I really think that's the majority of what this is about. My friends that have these in other areas of Denver, that's kind of what they're doing. I know I had one friend in Stapleton that when we had a pastor that needed a place to stay for 6 months, there was a place to do that. That's the benefit to it, and I really hope you guys do it.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody that would like to comment that has not signed up? Okay, please come forward.
Do you swear to tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission? I do. Please state your name and address.
So my name is Tiffany Madrid, and I live at 3369 South Grant Street. I also would like to echo many of the benefits that I've heard this evening and voice my support for allowing accessory dwelling units in our neighborhoods. I would like to suggest that some of the language around the criteria for these units be considered going forward, specifically as it pertains to the size. Part of my family, we're considering building an AUD, and part of the purpose would be to house my parents as they age. Both of my parents are particularly large people. And honestly, hearing that 650 square feet would be the limit, really sounds confining considering the sizes of their bodies, literally. I think that most other jurisdictions that have adopted AUDs have looked at making the size requirements larger, around 800 to 1,000 square feet. And I think that Inglewood should consider increasing that square footage to take into account that not all people are the same size. I'd also like to ask that the language around the residency requirement be considered a little bit further. I think, though, it's really important that we have a residency requirement to ensure that investors aren't coming into our neighborhoods to purchase homes just for investment property. I think it's important that we ensure that our neighborhoods are being filled by residents and our income taxes are staying here. However, as a property owner and thinking about the long run, there may be an instance in the future where our family would like to retire and use the property for income. And we would like the option to be able to rent out both the primary and the accessory, the AUD. So being able to have that flexibility, I think, would be an important part to ensuring that residents can actually use their properties as an investment strategy going forward for retirement. So maybe thinking about maybe having a 5-year residency requirement, and then if that resident decides to move forward and rent, they could do that, long as they showed that they had a commitment to the neighborhood. So those are my thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please come forward.
Do you swear you'll tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission? Okay, please state your name and address.
My name's Jacob Bettis, so I think I just misheard you on there. I'm 2961 South Bannock Street. So I definitely agree with what was just said regarding the length of time in the unit before potentially using it as a rental in the long-term retirement plan for any individual. As someone at my age, I'm sure that that's not something that you guys would expect to hear, but definitely people are thinking about that all over the place, and I think that that's a huge value. In the interim, this neighborhood is amazing, and I want to be able to share it with my friends and family as well, people that are visiting. Also, for the family that ends up being misplaced with, as we have these massive influxes of people coming in, and my brother is not able to be as close to me as I wish that he was, and so I think that this is a great opportunity to allow those people to come into our neighborhoods in a much more, feasible aspect for a broader community. So I think it adds to the diversity, which is huge if we want to continue to move forward as people, having other opinions in different diverse populations is extremely important to making the right decision. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to come up? Thank you. Please come up. Okay.
Sorry I didn't sign up. That's okay. Do you swear to tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission? I do. Okay. Your name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Judy Brown. I live at 1033 West Stanford Place. I was very excited to see that you were all considering this. I think it's a fabulous thing for our community. I do, unfortunately, disagree heartily with the last two comments about doing anything different with the residency. And the reason that I disagree with that is one of the biggest challenges that I know as an Englewood resident, and I am a real estate broker, I'm very familiar with. The biggest challenge is we have one of the highest densities of non-owner occupied single-family residences in the South area. It's one of the biggest challenges for our schools, and it does not help when you have changes going through neighborhoods, and rentals are not the number one thing. And I would hate to see this turn into 2 rental properties. I think that you're going to have an issue ongoing with neighborhoods if you change the residency requirement. I think it's essential that that be part of the accessory dwelling unit. That's just my opinion. But I'm thrilled that you're doing this. I think it's the right thing for Englewood. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak?
He needs a mirror. I told him. Do you swear you'll tell the truth in these proceedings before the Planning and Zoning Commission? I do. Okay, please state your name and address.
My name's Laura Jones, and I'm at 3106 South Sherman. I just want to say that I'm really in support of doing the ADUs. I've lived in Englewood for about 4 years, and originally bought our house thinking we would stay for a couple years. And we've really grown to love the community and want to stay here. We have 2 kids now, and so our house is tight. And my parents are retiring, as well as my in-laws. And we envision building the ADU to use that both as rental income, but also facilitate guests. So it's really important to our family that we don't have to have guesting in hotels or scrape our house to build a massive house. We feel like the ADU is the perfect solution for both our neighborhood. and our family. And the only thing that I ask would be that we move forward because we have a garage that's really old and unusable. And basically, since we bought the house, we've been looking at the internet and you all, like, what is going to happen here? And, a lot of the dates have been thrown out where we've been talking about it, not talking about it. So I'm really happy to be here at the public hearing today, and I just hope that we continue to move forward so we can move on. Yay or nay? I hope it's a yay, but we really want a usable garage in our lot. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are 15 people more behind me that want to speak. Thank you.
Barbara Peterson at 3371 South Corona Street. And I realize that the ADUs can be great in specific areas. Understand that. I didn't like some of the concepts when we were in the June, and they showed us some of the pictures of some of the examples. I disagree with the one gentleman that changed the exclusion on the certain zoning, because I do believe, Cynthia, we're excluded right now in our area. So I'd like that to maintain as is, because I do agree. I think somebody was talking about how dense it is right now. We would like to keep some of those areas. Please, please, please keep some of the single residential. Because that's my fear there. I do also, somebody commented on even the keeping it not all rentals. I think that gets to be disgusting too. And it starts to just, we've got enough rentals even in our single residential areas, which becomes a problem in just home maintenance, yard maintenance, etc. I think one of the other items too, now I forgot what it was, darn it. Oh, in the look. Is this a possibility that could have a single residential in the front and the ADU can be two-story? Is that correct on how this can look? Right? I thought so. And that I think I find not a good look at all. If you have all these single residential and then you go down a neighborhood and then you see these second stories in the back. I think that's not a good look at all. That should be considered. I think just the carriage houses alone, kind of in the old days and the original carriage houses that Englewood did have, is a better look if you're going to do anything like that in those zoned areas. So that's something to consider, just how that does look as a whole presentation in a neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else like to come forward? All righty. Should we close public comment? Yep. What? No, not quite.
Just under the wire.
Britt Fuchs, 3151 South Clarkson Street. I would encourage that people that have strong opinions one way or the other to be invited to a study session to really kind of comb through what's workable and also what, like the second story in the back of a single story. Just consider, instead of throwing it in front of council as a yes or a no, but rather really what would work for Englewood that may be unique to other cities, and even consider what's working in other countries as well. Because there are some really tastefully done things all around the world that could be applied to models here that maybe haven't been thought of. And also considering small spaces, and then somebody mentioned what's on the internet, and really kind of considering how to do it in a way that benefits individuals as well as the entire community. So that's all.
Thank you very much. All right, one last chance. Going once. Going twice. All righty, shall we end public comment? Thank you. All righty, before we move on to discussions, this movie is...
I think we need a roll call on that.
Okay, yeah, let's have a roll call.
Yes.
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 Mr. Freemeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Madrid?
Yes.
Chair Kinton?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move that we approve case 20170, excuse me, case 201401 accessory dwelling units that we approve.
All righty. Do we need a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh.
All righty. I was going to take the. We're not in our usual chairs, and I was going to take an offer to see if there's a consensus to take a 5-minute break to use the restroom and to stretch because I need to. Okay. All right.
Let's do that.
Can we just go ahead and do that? I don't think we need to vote on that, right? Let's do it.
No. As long as we all come back.
We just have to